In this video, we're going to be looking at the novel A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, and we'll put two different illustrated versions of the book head to head in order to see which is the best. It's Folio Society versus Easton Press.
James Joyce's A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man was first serialized beginning in 1914, then published on its own as a proper novel 2 years later. Joyce has a pretty massive reputation and is one of the most revered writers of the 20th century, but he didn't actually produce that much. Really, we've got four major works. There is his collection of 15 short stories, Dubliners. I've already done a video on it, and we'll try to put a title card up here. Next is his first and most accessible novel, A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. That's followed by the more complex and longer novels, the impressive Ulysses and the daunting Finnegan's Wake. Why then, with such a relatively small literary output, does James Joyce have such a massive reputation in the literary world? It's probably due to his stylistic innovations. His journey to get the written word where he eventually wanted to take it informs a large part of this first novel. While the city of Dublin, Ireland is the backdrop for all four of the major works, it was also, in a sense, the central character of Dubliners. In A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, we get an actual character this time as the protagonist, someone that's kinda like Joyce but isn't quite James Joyce, a character named Stephen Dedalus. Over the course of the novel's 5 chapters, we follow Stephen from a very young boy to a young man of about 20 years old. Stephen is a clever child who's extremely sensitive to the meaning of words and especially the sound of them. Language is used by oppressive authoritarians to hold Stephen in shackles that everybody else in society seems comfortable with. But language also becomes a tool that Stephen employs to take responsibility for himself and to reject convention, forming his own bold path forward. The novel isn't always easy to read. Joyce employs a number of unfamiliar expressions and includes a certain degree of ambiguity that invites interpretation. But the language evolves as it moves forward, and once you get going, you'll probably connect to the protagonist. If you have an artistic temperament, this story may pull you back to your own youth, when you struggled with the uncertainties of interactions with your classmates and family, with politics and religion, and with finding your own place in a world that doesn't seem to make much sense or much room for you. That modernist and youthful notion of wanting to reject the old broken systems in front of you and forge your new path in a new direction with your life may in fact be a universal human characteristic. And its depiction here is one of the novel's greatest successes.
I first encountered the novel as a 19-year-old student through this Penguin Trade Edition. It's one of their 20th century classics, which old bookhounds will recognize from its distinct seafoam colored spine. It features a photograph of James Joyce as a young man on the cover. And was printed in 1993. This copy of A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man features all the support material a first-time reader of the book would need to get through it. It opens with a lengthy introduction from Seamus Dean. It's 37 pages long and features academic analysis of the role of naming and quotation in the text, as well as a long look at Irish political history and the country's struggle toward national identity. After that, we get a brief list of suggestions for further reading. At the back, there are over 50 pages of annotations or notes that help clarify the many Irish expressions, specific locations, literary allusions, and religious terms that are used in the narrative. Every good, pretentious book collection needs at least one copy of Portrait, and most of the big publishers have tackled it, so when I was able to upgrade to some deluxe illustrated hardback versions of this novel, I had to get on board. So let's get to it. Here we have A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man from both Easton Press and from the Folio Society. Let's explore each of these hardcover illustrated editions in greater detail. This is the edition from Easton Press. This edition was published in 1977 and is part of their 100 Greatest Books Ever Written collection. It's bound in top grain leather. It's appropriately green in color, with border in shamrock and gold, and a matching design on both front and back. The spine has 4 hubs and features the same clover icon repeated 3 times, along with the book's title and the publisher logo in gold. All 3 exposed edges of the text block are finished in gold gilt. The sewn binding is finished with a green and yellow headband and a thick copper-colored silk bookmark. The binding itself is done very well as the book opens comfortably. As you can see, this edition is much larger than the standard trade paperback size. It's 5.5 centimeters taller and 4 centimeters wider. When we crack the book open, we're met by Easton Press's standard silk moire end papers. The book is printed on archival quality paper with a smooth suede finish, and my copy comes in at a slightly warm cream color according to color swatches. It opens with a publisher's preface that runs through a brief Joyce biography, then details the elements of this specific Easton Press edition. The introduction is written by Hugh Kenner, a professor and author who's written extensively about Joyce. He provides an analysis of Joyce's style and helps encourage appreciation for it by comparing it to Dickens and other writers. Kenner illustrates how refined and effective the language of this novel is, with convincing examples. His introduction is 9 pages long and is very well written. In this edition, each of the novel's 5 chapters feature this unique font for the chapter number and the initial letter. The frontispiece is by Jonathan Talbot and is a portrait of James Joyce. It features striking yellow and blue coloring and is exclusive to this Easton Press edition. The interior artwork is by Brian Keogh and was first published by the Limited Edition Club in 1968. Keogh provides 11 color images and 17 black and white integrated illustrations here. The artwork is presented on the same paper stock as the text, and the images all fall immediately next to the text they coincide with. Let's take a detailed look at the artwork now. Above the introduction is our first integrated illustration, a portrait of Joyce that was obviously referenced from the same photograph we saw on the cover of the Penguin edition. Next is the first color image from Keogh, a depiction of Simon Daedalus's story of the Moo Cow, which opens the narrative. Keogh uses diagonal brushwork for the sky, vertical lines for the field, and includes buildings along the horizon to represent the idealized rural Irish landscape. Here we have an illustration of the day Stephen's parents wave goodbye as they drop him off at Clongo's Wood College. Then we have a small illustration of young Stephen praying in the dormitory before climbing into bed. Keogh's second color illustration is of Simon Daedalus before Christmas dinner is served. He holds court in front of the fireplace, and we can see the portrait of his own father and the statue of Mary on the mantelpiece behind him. The blurring effect around his head is due to the fact that he stands before the pier glass above the mantel. I love the details of the fireplace and the carpet here, which suggest the luxury that the Daedalus family initially enjoys. The next color image is of the school in evening procession to the little altar in the woods. Stephen is boat bearer on this occasion. The background for this piece is impressionistic, but there are some really nice details to the boys in the foreground. The next image is an integrated illustration of Father Doland, the prefect of studies, administering discipline with his pandybat. The fourth color image is of the kindly Rector Conmee, who listens to Stephen's complaints about the unfair treatment and assures him that he'll speak to Father Dolan about the incident. The rector is nicely paralleled to the image of Christ behind him in this illustration. After that, we get a small integrated image of the boys celebrating Stephen's victory. It could benefit from a little more variety despite the uniform they all wear. Another tiny integrated image features Uncle Charles, who has a great little comic scene to start off Chapter 2. He dresses very formally before heading out for his morning smoke. In this image, Stephen and his father explore the Queen's College grounds as Simon reminisces about his time as a student there. That's juxtaposed nicely against an image of Stephen walking the streets of Dublin as he wrestles with his sins. And that leads to a similar image, this one of the churchgoers Stephen sees, whom he deems as hypocrites. Stephen eventually determines that he cannot confess in the college chapel, and he sits alone in the front bench with his guilt and shame. That brings us to the first of 2 double-page color spreads. This one occurs right before one of the most infamous sections of this novel. The bulk of Chapter 3 is made up of Father Arnell's sermons to the boys, who are on a 2-day retreat. The gesture of his hands demonstrates great attention to Joyce's description, and 4 images over here are lifted from the Fire and Brimstone sermon as the priest details all the physical and spiritual torments of hell that await the sinner. On my first reading of the novel years ago, I found this section especially tedious to read, but I honestly appreciate it now. It helped me connect with the panic and dread Stephen feels, as these words all seem pointed straight at him. The following color illustration just might be my favorite of the bunch. After the sermon, Stephen has a waking nightmare vision of his own hell, and we see it depicted here. The 16-year-old prays while horrible goat-like creatures murmur to themselves in a field of filth and excrement under a blood-red sun. The terror of this vision comes across very well in this image. Next, we have an integrated image of the priest at the Church Street Chapel listening to Stephen's confession. I'm not sure about the posture and expression on the priest's face here, as I felt he was gentle and thoughtful in the novel as he guided Stephen through his confessions. In the next black and white piece, we get a depiction of the closing scene of Chapter 3 as Stephen returns to the college in the morning and is filled with happiness to take the communion with his classmates. Here, the priest raises the wafer and wine, and we can see the strong details down the center of the image. In this atmospheric color illustration, Stephen and the director discuss the possibility of Stephen joining the order. The vertical brushwork gives this piece a towering sense of height, and the desk details and the cast shadows all indicate a very close reading of the text, as Joyce describes the lighting effects with precision in this scene. Near the beginning of Chapter 4, we get an integrated illustration of a priest and followers at prayer as Stephen embraces his faith and takes a more active role in mastering his impulses through willpower. Here, Stephen walks on a thin wooden bridge as a squad of Christian brothers cross him. The group is contrasted against the single individual, while the light and dark also contrast, highlighting Stephen's feelings of being apart from the truly pious. In the second double-page color spread, we see a depiction of the novel's key scene, Stephen's epiphany from the end of Chapter 4. The blues and greens in this composition draw the eye around this dusky scene. Stephen sees a girl staring out to sea just after he's had a powerful moment of spiritual clarity, and his soul soars. I love the city lights visible through the mist on the opposing shore. This is a great illustration. Brian Keogh maintains the details of the landscape from the previous color image in this black and white integrated image of Stephen by himself near the water's edge. Here's an illustration of the streets of Dublin as Stephen makes his way to university to try to catch lectures that have already started. In this one, we see Stephen and his university friends before a sort of petition that they're supposed to sign. Details like the portrait of the Tsar and the waiting pen as Stephen refuses to sign are all appropriate here. In this color image, Stephen makes a cowl of his blanket and rests as he tries to imagine the red flowers of the wallpaper taking shape as a roseway that climbs up and away as he falls to sleep. The final integrated image is of Stephen with birds behind him. Bird imagery factors heavily into the whole novel, but especially in this fifth and final chapter. And the final color piece is a collage of images from the novel's final section when we read Stephen's first-person journal account. The fragmented images include Emma at a tea shop, images from a dream of phosphorescent men peering at him, an old Irish man smoking his pipe alongside eyes of girls among the leaves, and his friend Davin near a cigar shop. The journal itself is a collection of incongruous impressions, so the final depiction here is a perfect fit. Now we'll take a look at a competing edition from a different publisher, one which I'm rather familiar with. This is the most recent version of A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man from the Folio Society. It's part of the short-lived Folio Collectibles line, which ran from 2016 to 2017. They looked to revisit older classic folio editions at a cheaper price point, and are different from standard folio releases in a few respects. This version came out in 2016 and was released with no slipcase, like the other Folio Collectibles. The book has a blocked cover image of a figure in silhouette who's walking away while wearing an orange scarf. That same orange color is used for the script on the title. In the bottom corner, we have the author name and the publisher logo in silver. On the spine, there's an image of a pen nib tracing a line in silver. The book's title is in orange, while the author name and publisher logo are again in silver. The top of the text block is sprayed green to match the cover. On the back, we have the bird in silhouette flying away, and all of this is on a deep green cloth-covered board. Curiously, with these editions, the boards have some give to them. The binding is finished with a black headband, and the book also includes a black ribbon bookmark. If we bring back the Penguin Trade Edition, we can see that the folio version is 3 centimeters taller and 2 centimeters wider. When we crack this book open, we see deep orange end papers in a medium stock. That is followed by an enlarged folio colophon in green, and the title pages, also in green. There is no introduction or table of contents here, nor is there any back matter. It's a no-frills type of presentation on these Folio Collectibles. The book is printed on Folio's current go-to Abbey Wove paper, which is smooth and is close to where the Easton Press paper fell in terms of whiteness, at least according to color swatches. Dodie Masterman provides 8 interior illustrations here. Her work can be found in many classic folio editions, including Anna Karenina and The Secret Garden. The art is presented on the same paper as the text, and the images all land right next to the text they coincide with, though there is no table of contents for them either, as there is in modern folio releases. It's actually the same black and white pen and ink work that was featured in the original 1965 folio release of Portrait. Let's take a look at the artwork now. The first illustration, the frontispiece, is dominated by diagonal hatching, which creates strong depth. It features an individual, likely Stephen Dedalus, sitting at a chair at a desk in a contemplative posture. For a novel as reflective and thoughtful as Portrait, it makes for a perfect opening image. The second piece is of the family gathering at Christmas time. The sparse details, like the decorations hanging from the light and the mantelpiece, establish the setting, but the lighter and more delicate details of the faces of the figures help convey the tension of the political argument that eventually explodes on this occasion. The third illustration is of young Stephen and a girl who both leave a children's party at Harold's Cross and take the tram together. The image of Stephen was lifted from here in order to create the image that appears on the front cover of this edition. They've just colored in the scarf and blacked out the figure in silhouette. The fourth image is of Simon Dedalus and his two cronies as they drink to their memories of the past. There's a great decorative flourish in the background, and loose vertical lines help define the three men. The scene occurs when Stephen accompanies his father to Cork to sell off some assets. Stephen is ashamed both because of his father's conduct and his fixation on the past. The fifth illustration is of Stephen devastated by the impacts of the sermon at the retreat, desperately attempting to pray. Dark horizontal lines work for Stephen and help him stick out against the details of the room, which are rendered in vertical lines. I can actually feel the crushing devastation Stephen experiences in this scene through the artwork here. Our sixth image is dominated by internal framing. It's the same scene we saw depicted in the Easton edition, of the director asking Stephen if he might consider joining their religious order. And like that other version, it remains faithful to Joyce's description of the backlit priest. The seventh image is of the dean of the university who's down on his knees trying to light a fire, and he and Stephen discuss igniting literal flames and the flames of inspiration. Stephen, in a way, thinks of himself as above this man in certain respects of understanding, and thus he stands aloof, fading into the top of the page. The final image is of three women with their parasols and hats. They've got delicate facial details, and there's male figures in the background in loose lines. At this moment, Stephen is chatting with his university friends while walking to the library to avoid the rain. One of them whispers that Stephen's beloved is there. He listens in and overhears them discussing whether it's better to go abroad or stay in Ireland when starting a career. This is an appropriate final image, as Stephen must resolve his issues with this young lady before he can properly move forward in his own direction. Before we get to the head-to-head details, I'd like to briefly focus on printing quality. There's no contest here. The printing in the Easton Press version is inconsistent. At times it seems fine, but the text gets darker or lighter from page to page. Occasionally there are oddities like this missed spot, and at times the text has an odd echo effect, where it looks like a lighter printing pass was misaligned with a darker printing pass. This creates that shadowed effect, and it happens often enough to affect the reading process. If we compare a close-up of this printing to a close-up of the text from the Folio Society, the difference in quality is clear. Folio's printing technique is always consistent and precise, and is one of the most significant reasons why I tend to upgrade to their editions much more than others. This difference is also apparent when it comes to the artwork. The illustrations just aren't as sharp as they should be, especially when it comes to the color pieces. I feel like I'm looking at a slightly degraded photograph of the art rather than at a high-quality reproduction of it. But printing isn't everything. Let's look at these two editions in a more complete comparison. More often than not, the Folio Society is going to win a head-to-head battle with Easton Press, but I just don't think that they've offered enough here, especially when the EP offers so much. The top grain leather cover on the Easton Press edition is tough to beat. The bindings are both great, and Folio is clearly the winner when it comes to printing quality. But the Easton Press version has a preface and an introduction, many color and black and white illustrations, and the overall design is more cohesive and complete. On the secondary market, the Folio edition can be very tough to find, and when you do, it's often expensive. It is just a modern remix of the original 1965 release, which is more easily available, but this Easton Press version is everywhere. I almost always see it for sale when I come across a decent collection of Easton and Franklin books, and it's usually very well priced at $20 to $30. When you consider all you're taking home at that price point, The leather cover, the sewn binding, the integrated full-page and double-page spread artwork, solid front matter, plus 22 karat gold and full gilding. It is quite the bargain. I hope the Folio Society revisits this title sometime in the future and gives it an overhauled design from top to bottom, complete with a slipcase and fresh new artwork. I think they could work wonders with this title and produce an even better upgrade than the EP. But until then, the Easton Press is my go-to illustrated hardback edition of A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. And I guess the paperback can go to the Box of Doom. As always, thanks for watching, and if you'd like more content, stay tuned to this channel or circle back to previous videos.